Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Son of a Blitch podcast. I am your host, George Blitch, and I just wrapped up a wonderful conversation with Grahame Jones. For those who are not familiar, Grahame Jones was a game warden here in the state of Texas for over 27 years. The last few years of his job here, he was actually the director of law enforcement as a colonel, overseeing all the operations and organizing those for the game wardens of Texas. He's been a part of so many other organizations, Coastal Conservation Association, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. He's been the award recipient of the Sam Beeson Conservation Leader Award through the Texas Wildlife Association. There are so many different organizations he's helped lead over the years. We talk about that history of, the organizations he's been a part of in the past and, currently the roles that he has there in the outdoor space. He also is a guide for all water guides. He takes people out to enjoy the waterways of Texas and the rivers and the lake systems. There's so many things that we touch base on today that I think are important, not just for Texans, but people all around the country that want to really key into conservation awareness education. And I think that for those of you who are listening in other states, look for your state organizations that are involved with really bringing about awareness and education in the hunting and the fishing community, because I believe that there are so many great places for you to get tied into and really be able to see how your membership, maybe not even just as far as funds, but, cleanups. We talked about there was a cleanup here he's part of that, a couple of years ago had 22 tons of trash that they cleaned up in the waterway systems. And that's a problem that is not just here in Texas, that's everywhere. We can all do our part to leave things better behind for future generations. And I think that it's imperative that you look for those organizations around you and, have a good sense of belonging and see how you can go ahead and really help preserve this way of life for future generations. That's a big key in my podcasts, right? As far as conservation and awareness. And I think there is very few people that can speak to it on the level of which that Grahame Jones did today in our conversation. And I highly encourage you guys to go check out his website in the show notes below, as far as, all the things that he's got involved in, and book a trip with him. Go out there on the water. Think about this. Who else can you sit on a boat with and learn from and with and have such a wonderful afternoon or, series of afternoons than someone like Grahame? I mean, what a wealth of knowledge that he is. I can't wait for my trip and I'll be taking my family out with him soon. So guys, go check that out. And, make sure that you're following him on his socials for all the things he's got involved in. He really raises some very important issues today. And I think that he's someone who is a wonderful spokesman for conservation in the state of Texas and beyond. So, guys, without further ado, here is my podcast with Grahame Jones. I hope you guys enjoy. And if you do like this, please subscribe, maybe even share this episode with a friend. I think everyone who will listen to it will really find it educational, entertaining, and highly enjoyable. So, guys, thank you once again for tuning into the podcast. You guys have a great day. Take care. Hey, Grahame, how you doing today, man?
Good. How are you? Good to see you.
Fantastic, man. I'm glad to be having this podcast time. I'm sorry I had to postpone it. Last time I had zero connection out at the ranch and kind of figured let's go ahead and get this to where we're not going to have any glitches and cutouts because I'm really excited to chat with you. So, look, with a lot of my guests, I kind of like to start at the very beginning. Let's go ahead and give a little bit of background 101 on, where you're born and raised and kind of how you got into your love of, the wildlife and, fishing and hunting and all that Texas has to offer. And then, we'll kind of talk about your, storied career and kind of what you got going on these days with, your all water guides. And, we'll kind of thread that needle as we go. So if you don't mind, maybe just kind of give us a little background on, like I said, where you grew up and, your introduction into the outdoors.
You bet. And also and first of all, let me just say thanks for having me and
Cheers.
really been looking forward to this for a long time. I love following you on Instagram and listening and watching sometimes your podcasts, and you do a fantastic job. I love how you dig into the issues, and just so wanted to thank you for that. And
Thank you.
then secondly, since you are interviewing me, you said there won't be any glitches or edits, or there'll be a bunch of glitches and edits since you're interviewing me, but we'll get there eventually. But yeah, so grew up in Houston. I could literally ride my bike to the Astrodome, and I did actually on more than one occasion. Um, and I mean, my very close family. My dad, is a mentor of mine. living here in Austin, 95 years old. My mom's 87. So, they're still supervising me on a daily basis. But he was not a hunter at all. And Korean War combat veteran. So there was, he just didn't, his father hunted, but he didn't hunt. Both my grandparents hunted, by the way. Both my grandfathers hunted. I never met either one of them, but I have lots of pictures and they hunted a lot. So I've heard a lot of stories. So it's in my genes. But he fished a little bit and he would take, we would do deep sea fishing trips with my dad and my brother and some friends, and we would do, maybe one of those every couple of years. But it was not a family activity. Hunting and fishing was not a family activity. Um, we did other things, but my dad worked a lot. And so it wasn't really in the cards. But when I was 8 years old, some neighbors moved in one house down, and they moved in from Mexico. Dr. Carlos Vaquero and his son, Carlos Jr. He had three sisters. And I got to know Carlos and became very, very good friends with that family. And I was the third child. And so, how what kind of goes on with the third child as far as, what you can and can't do. So one day, Carlos and Dr. Vaquero, I was eating lunch over there. I was 9 years old. And they asked me if I wanted to go to Mexico on a dove hunt and down to through Tamaulipas and San Fernando Valley in that area. And I was like, there's no way I've known y'all for less than a year. There's no way my parents are going to let me go on this dove hunt with you guys to Mexico, drive to Mexico. And so 9-year-old me walks down the street, goes in the front door. And I asked my parents, I said, hey, here's what's going on. Would y'all be willing to think about letting me go on this dove hunt to Mexico? And within like 30 seconds, they were, oh yeah, of course you can go, have fun. So third child again. But yeah, that really, when I look back on a singular moment, that right there in sort of the preparation for that trip still today, dove season's coming up on Sunday and, a few days from now. And the preparation for the journey, the preparation for the hunt has always meant a lot to me. And to kind of fast forward, we went dove hunting to Mexico sometimes twice a year, every year for the next 16 years. When we were old enough to drive ourselves, we would drive into Mexico and go fishing and camp at La Pesca and Soto La Marina, on the beaches at the passes a couple times a year. And so, that's what really, if I had to nail it down, that introduction through a neighbor into hunting and fishing is really what set the fire. And I mean, I can remember, driving back and kind of towards the end, when I was 13, 14, 15 years old, talking about with them about my wanting to be a game warden. So they're inherently tied. And then I had a group of friends in Houston. Carlos, obviously, Joseph, Abear, Barkley Ridge, others that we hunted, Joe McCoy. We hunted. That's what we did. I mean, our spring breaks were sort of scheduled around fishing. We duck hunted, we dove hunted, we deer hunted, just every opportunity. And we were lucky enough, I think then, and we can talk about this later, then it was sort of easier. The access piece of it was easier.
Yeah.
You had friends or maybe a relative. In some cases, you could ask to go hunting somewhere and you could do it. And although that's still maybe there's an element of that, I don't think we're anywhere, close to what it was in our, late 70s and early 80s.
Well, even I mean, I know that you got your first deer around your 14th, birthday area. That's, and just to throw a date, that's early 80s there too. And I think
Right.
since
Yeah.
then, we've had at least double our population. That was probably
That's right.
15, 16 million then. I mean, and we're
That's
over
right.
that.
That's
So
right.
that alone is, I think, one hurdle. And then
Yes.
the idea of people who have, obviously a big private land state like we have here in Texas, 95, 98%, kind
Sure.
of depends on where you look at it, but the data, but some people are a little more closed off, and certain areas that used to be able to knock on the door and go in, that may be more of a challenge these days than it used to be. So I know exactly what you're talking about coming from that era in hunting. Yeah.
You bet. Yeah. I mean, we would go down and hunt this side of Angleton. We'd go down, drive down the old 288 south
Hmm.
of Houston and go hunting in that area. We hunted in Fulshire. We hunted out, close in Katy. In all three of those places that we hunted then are all either, subdivisions or business parks today. All three of them are, and I don't mean to be doom and gloom.
No, it's
But
just
I
what
mean,
it is.
things, it changes and evolves, and so it is, it is very different.
Well, I remember growing up in Houston myself, and there was an era of time where I knew people had the shotguns in the back of the trucks, and they would
Oh yeah,
go and do some bird hunting out in
right.
Katy, which is now basically West Houston. I mean, it's
Yes,
I'm out there, I see it every
yes,
day, and it's those areas of access are much more few and far between. And some areas in Katy, there's nothing that used to be there 30 years ago. So that's a big change in the landscape. And I want to talk about that kind of idea of like what we need to conserve and stuff, and we'll kind
sure,
of get to that too.
sure. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier on you found it at this drive and this interest
Mhm.
at around 13, 14 years old, like you were saying
Yeah,
you were talking about wanting to be a
sure.
game warden. Obviously, you spent a 27-year long career there. Were Colonel, you were. I mean, we'll bridge that gap here in a second. But I was curious, what was it that first inspired you? Was there a particular individual that kind of got you into understanding what a game warden was? Because some people might,
Mhm.
growing up, you might get checked by a game warden, but really understanding what they do and the power of that position. What was it that kind of gave you that springboard to want to go towards that? And then how did you eventually decide, and when did you decide that you wanted to become a game warden? What did that look like in that transition?
Yeah, and I think that some of that, goes back to again crossing the border with a limit of doves from Mexico. And although they weren't game wardens, it did, I learned age 9, 10, 11, 12 that okay, there's some sort of, oversight on limits and how those would apply and then there's just a lot of talk about game wardens sitting around the campfire around the deer camp. Everyone's like talking about game wardens. Is that a game warden over there? Was that a game warden that drove by? So it's that mystery that always I think was really interesting to me, and it was like it's such a mysterious job and person, and it was almost like a phantom. um but I had back in the day in Houston, I had several friends whose parents were Houston police officers or in other law enforcement activities. Um, I mean, and there's some law enforcement that goes way, way back in my family as well. But so there is that aspect of it sort of in the genes, like the hunting fishing piece. But I think really it my brother went into law enforcement. He's 4 years older than me. He kind of had that law enforcement drive. We grew up on watching some of the law enforcement old school sitcoms, as well. And and so I think it was the combination of seeing and looking up to people in law enforcement with my love of the outdoors and trying to make that hybrid approach, combining those two. It just made sense. And then I think I made a conscious decision. And again, I love when I hear about people's, I'm going to go to college and I don't know what I want to be. That's great. I think I think keeping that, being open to those choices and what might come down the pike or being influenced by a professor a certain direction is fantastic. But in eighth grade, I wrote a paper, which I still have, about wanting to be a game warden. So I all through, really high school and in college, I knew what I wanted to be. And and then I got to know game wardens along the way too. I did internships in college, but people talk about like this is my dream come true, and it was a dream come true for me. It still is. It was absolutely an incredible experience, and to know in seventh, eighth grade that this is what I want to do, and then have that dream come true. Um, Lots and lots of people influence that, from my brother, my sister, my parents, friends. And I'm so thankful for it that, that they gave me the flexibility and my parents allowed me to follow my dream. I mean, we lived there, in Old Braeswood, as I mentioned, close to the Astrodome. My dad was a lawyer. And, you know, the fact that they were like, you follow your dream, that's what's important. That means more to me than anything.
Well, that's a great thing to be able to support that. I mean, you what the old saying, right? You find what you want to do and love to do every day. You won't work, but
Yeah.
it is hard work, and especially being a game warden. And I was curious about what that looked like for you, as far as where all in Texas you spent. I know you spent a
Mhm.
lot of time on the east side of Texas, but
Mhm.
kind of walk me through whenever you went to the academy in 93 and then you
Yep.
graduated out there, and then what does that look like as far as, okay, now you're green, you're out there. I mean, well, you're part of the green line too, but like you're there, and then what does it look like? Where are you going, and what does
Yeah.
the beginning of that journey look like for you in the field?
Yeah, well, I mean, I graduated from the academy, and when they interview you, they ask you, would you be willing to go anywhere? And literally, I would go anywhere. And occasionally, someone will sign up to be a game warden, and then you hand them out they get the duty assignments, and they're like, "Whoa, wait a minute, you're sending me to El Paso?" And I don't think so. And so, literally, we've had people resign the day of duty assignments. Not
Really?
very, very, very rare. I
Yeah.
mean, the far majority of these folks, again, this is a life aspiration for them. But we've had that happen before, and it was always so shocking to me because I would have gone anywhere. But yeah, I took my 1989 a Chevrolet Caprice. Back then we had cars, and I headed over to East Texas to Woodville, pretty deep East Texas. I mean Tyler County, not Tyler, but Tyler County. And I worked that area, that county, and some vicinity counties, Angelina County, Jasper County. Hardin County was a different district, but I was in touch and contact with those guys in Hardin County. Um, and worked the Neches River, the Angelina River bottoms, Sam Rayburn, Danby, again, and there was duck hunting and deer hunting and a little bit of dove hunting. If you found doves and someone had a limit of doves, you better check for bait on the ground. I will say that. But but yeah, I mean, it was very, there's still dog running going on, which was illegal at the time
Mhm.
when I got there, and it lasted a little bit longer. And certainly in those eastern counties, Newton County and Jasper County, more so than in Tyler County, but it was still going on. While I was there, in a couple of adjacent counties over, a game warden's house was actually burned down because of the dog running issue. But yeah, so that was, East Texas, and I still am in contact with folks from Tyler County. Talk about mentors. I mean, back then we did not have Parks and Wildlife did not have a field training officer program. So there was no formula, a formal training program. Once you stayed in contact with your captain, and other game wardens worked with you and helped you. And I had a partner, Mike Wheat, who was there, and fantastic person. We're friends to this day. He moved up to Perryton, in Ogletree County, up the top of the Panhandle. But after a couple of years, but fantastic. I mean, he helped me. Luke McMahon, other game wardens helped me extensively. But there was no formalized formal FTO program. So, you rode with DPS, you rode with sheriff's office deputies, and they really helped socialize you into that law enforcement. Today, there's a more formal process that's a very good thing. But yeah, I mean, it was Deep East Texas, and I loved every minute of it. And you look back on it and you think, when were you, when did you have the most fun? And that's when you had the most fun. And it was just, it'd be like October or pre-deer season, the first little norther pushes through. You get in your car and you think to yourself, where do I want to go? Do I want to go get on the river? Do I want to pull a boat? Do I want to go sit up on a hill and look for night hunters? And it was just that sort of freedom that I think is in very few jobs in law enforcement, even today.
What do you think was the most common um, thing that you found as far as like wild game violations in that time period? Was there something, because I know you're mentioning river. I know obviously you spend a lot of your
Mhm.
time on rivers and lake systems now with all water guides, but I was kind of curious too. Was this something that you found? And were you kind of patrolling all over? Or did you kind of have a specification where you were kind of doing more land-based hunting, or was it fishing, or was it a combination for you? And is that something that whenever you become a game warden, is there kind of a trajectory now that kind of people do one or the other more so, or is it all encompassing as far as what you're seeing?
Well, I think then again there was, and there still is freedom to some degree, maybe not as much as there was, but Yeah, I mean, it kind of depended on the season. I mean, you had the whole county, and then you could go into other counties if someone needed help or there was a call or it was, there was a, game, maybe someone was on vacation, a game warden was sick or whatever, or it was understaffed. And so you would help out like that. But I mean, really, it kind of depended on the time of year. I mean, duck season opening weekends and we worked duck hunters. Deer season, we worked deer hunters. Sometimes they overlapped. You'd get on the water or the river or the lake and you'd be working duck hunters, but water safety also came into effect.
Yeah.
So, but I will say something, to sort of talk about I think like the most common violations. I mean, there was a lot of, water safety stuff, but, hunting without licenses, I think was more common maybe then than it is
Mhm.
now. There was a lot of road hunting and a lot of trespass related hunting without landowner consent. People would be dropped off. There was a lot of that was going on. Um, but yeah, I think that it's like some of that still exists, and there's still that diversity of the job. But with population growth, again, we kind of touched on that, and we can circle back, after, depending on the subject.
Mhm.
But sort of population also dictates like your duties at times. And so, you've got opening dove season coming up in a couple of days, as we mentioned, but you've also still got water safety season. So people are still out on the lakes and rivers and bays, and you got fishing and all this. So if you're, for example, on a coastal county, and it's that second split of dove season or maybe duck season's going on, but it's still warm. I mean, it all overlaps. Um, there's not really a specific focus as far as like a game warden. I'm going to focus just on water safety, or I'm going to focus just on, and I'm talking about field game wardens, just on hunting. There's just not the staffing to do that. So you really have to be kind of a jack of all trades and wear a bunch of different hats and be ready to transition because you also get calls. So you could be, checking deer camps on opening day of deer season, and then you get a call related to a missing boater, or you get a call related to, someone hunting off the road on the other side of the county. So you have to be pretty flexible.
And as far as like when you were first doing that, as far as communication lines, I mean, obviously we got cell phones now.
Mhm.
During that time, you guys having, high-end walkie-talkies, or you going through and communicating through your vehicle? What is that
Yeah.
mode of communication?
When I first went to work, I bought one of those cell phone bag phones with my
Okay.
own. And remember, it was like you paid like per minute, and it
Yeah.
was like $1 or whatever a minute, and then they rounded up to the next minute. It was these crazy fees. So I was going broke, paying for my cell phone, and then also putting gas. We with the time when we graduated, you got $80 a month, and that was for oil changes, boat oil, boat gas, and vehicle gas. Well, even at $1 a gallon or $1.25 a gallon or whatever it was, you could see how far $80 would get you. So we were all we were putting our own money in the gas tanks. And I remember one time I got called into the office and by my supervisor, and he said, "Hey, I need you to explain something to me." I said, "Yes, sir. What's that?" And he said, "How are you getting? I mean, I want to know so we can, get some help throughout the rest of the state. But how are you getting like 270 miles per gallon?" And I was like, "Well, I've been putting some money in my, not record. I wasn't writing it down. I was just like putting $30 in the tank, and I wasn't recording it." He said, "Well, if you're gonna do that, at least record it." So, I kind of got chewed out a little bit, but he knew we were trying to work and get the job done, so he wasn't too hard on us.
Well, you talk about that, and that's a point I wanted to bring up about the idea of funding and
Mhm.
what's coming through, because I believe it, as far as like Texas budget, the game wardens are getting less than 1% or around that. Maybe that's changed historically, but that was always the number that I always kind of had talked to with some of my game warden friends, and like the idea of, there's a lot of funding that comes from other outside resources and organizations. And even like I'm thinking about like Gear Up for Game Wardens, and as far as
Right.
some of the gear that comes out, can you talk about maybe some of those challenges of, the funding aspect, and maybe things have changed a lot in more recent years, and I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm not in that. I don't, I don't have a really good footing to be able to speak on that, but I was curious if you could kind of talk to that and kind of where some of that funding comes from and why it's beneficial for things like, Gear Up for Game Wardens, things that we can all get a part of, and, in our state and maybe other states as well, if they have, similar organizations.
Yeah, I mean, the funding is an important piece of it. I do think it's certainly better than it was. But with that said, it's still not, 100% where it needs to be. The legislative requests that, we're about to start a session here soon, in January. And so, Parks and Wildlife will prioritize, requests to the legislature, in addition to their base budget exceptional items that they deem are important. And, part of that is certainly going to be game warden staffing, and, but help with the budget. I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to be able to do the most basic job, and that's, patrol the state of Texas to protect our natural resources and people and water safety and, all that job encompasses. So it's not where it needs to be. We do need the funding piece is a big piece. I will say that there are, organizations like Gear Up, like Coastal Conservation Association that have been long, supporters of Parks and Wildlife in many ways, but also including law enforcement. It would be hard to accomplish our mission without that outside support, which I personally think it should all be funded through the state budget. I think that it should all be funded. It's important. And we can get to this of why conservation and why it all matters, even to non-hunters, non-anglers, non-boaters, but it's hugely important. And I think with the population growth, it's going to be even more important. I think conservation matters now more than it ever has before. And that's tied directly to, budgetary constraints. What can you do with what you have? And the other piece of it is that I'm super proud of is that, Parks and Wildlife, not just game wardens, biologists, technicians, admin staff, you name it. They and a lot of other state agencies, I'm sure do it too in federal, but I've seen it. They make it work. And so, game wardens are going to make it work. And so you give them $80 a month for gas, or you give them $350 a month for gas. They're going to make it work. And so a lot of times the folks that control the purse strings don't pick up on that because it works. And so it's like, at what level, are those folks having to sacrifice, or is the agency having to sacrifice to get the job done? And it just, is a testament to how hard and dedicated people at Texas Parks and Wildlife are.
Well, you mentioned like the legislative, sessions coming up and different funding requests and things. It sounds like you still have your finger on the pulse, and I know you're still involved with a lot of different organizations and agencies that are involved in trying to make sure that we have the best for our state and our state resources and for our
Yes.
population. If you could maybe, touch to that a little bit, because obviously I know you've worn a lot of hats, and so there's and the bio is very long of all the different groups you've worked with. You've done so much with so many organizations, and I was just kind of curious, when you left your career in 2020 and you retired from your 27-year career as a game warden, what kind of work aside from your guiding as far
Mhm.
as organizations where you really felt called to be a part of, and maybe why those organizations are important to you? So if you can maybe go along that, and so I'd love to
Sure.
thread that needle as far as
Yeah.
conservation and the importance. So if you can kind of
Yeah.
go through that I'd love to hear that.
Of course. And also, I do my day gig is I work for the 100 Club of Central Texas, which is a nonprofit organization, and it supports first responders and their families. Very important, near and dear to my heart. So it's allows me to be, connected on a daily basis to first responders, of which game wardens are a part of. So there's that piece.
Hmm.
But really, to me, the organizational aspect of it, as far as conservation organizations and associations, groups, whatever, really goes back to CCA, at the time GCCA. Um, Before I could drive, my mom or dad or brother was dropping me off at the West Houston GCCA meeting, because I was, on the board. I'm sure they were all like, "Who is this kid, and why is he in here?" And we're all drinking beer, and he can't even have a beer. Not, I mean, they would have like a beer during the
Right,
meeting.
right,
It
right,
wasn't
right.
like,
Yeah.
but it's like, this kid, what's going on here? So, kind of that to me, I mean, that built the foundation. And so CCA is extremely important to me. It always has been. And then ultimately, I ended up somehow on the state board for a short period of time before I went to work for Texas Parks and Wildlife. Yeah, but I think that it's so important for folks to find their sort of organizational conservation organization calling and where they feel comfortable with, whether it's one or two or three or whatever it is. I mean, we've got all these roads and paths to conservation. Um, and it used to be good enough, and I've talked about this before, but it used to be good enough to, buy your hunting and fishing license, and that money goes to, fund conservation in various ways and duck stamps. I mean, maybe the biggest conservation success story ever was the federal duck stamp, and we could do a separate podcast on that of how many
Right.
millions of acres that's
Yeah.
protected by hunters. But it's like, what is the path? Is the path CCA? Is the path Flatsworthy, Wild Turkey Federation, Texas Wildlife Association, Texas Foundation for Conservation, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers? Or is it a couple of those? And while all of those kind of have their lane, they intermingle, they cross paths, they cross pollinate too. And so now it's not just enough, in my opinion, for us to go buy our hunting licenses, fishing licenses. We have to get involved, if only to send in money, because money funds advocacy, and membership numbers matter. And when the legislature or the federal government is looking at what agency or organization someone who's, providing testimony represents, a lot of times they're going to look at that membership, look and see how much money they got in the bank, look and see if there's a PAC related. And it's just the reality. It's the reality of how a lot of times it works. And so those nonprofit dollars that support conservation, the effort of Parks and Wildlife or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, huge. I cannot say how important that is. And if you look like sort of membership trends, membership numbers not across the board, but in various organizations are slightly down right now, nationally and across the state. We're seeing that not huge decreases, like 1 to 5% maybe. And so that's interesting too. I think now when we need it most, we need to, and I'm speaking to myself, is to become more motivated in these organizations that support what we all love and hold dear.
What do you think it is, far as I mean, you kind of talked about it too. Like, you had a neighbor who took you out, and I think that that's something it doesn't have to just be family, right? I mean, a lot of times historically, and the seat I'm sitting in, it was a family thing. I learned to hunt and fish growing up with the family because they did it, and it was a way that our ancestors did it
Sure.
for many years before.
Yeah.
It's like, so like that is something that was just kind of built into my blood. But I think that's, there's like Outdoor Stewards of Conservation Foundation. They have a thing. It's like the Take With program. Like, take someone with you. Like, do
Right.
something to kind of show people who may not otherwise have those opportunities. I know, like my buddy Doug Dern, sharing the land. There's things where it's like landowners who need help. Well, there's land access seekers who they can work together and have. There's a lot of programs that I see, but I think it also is important for us individually as people who have very strong connections and desires to see this left better for those 7 generations down the line, to do some other things. And it sounds like one that, you're talking about too, is the dollar. I think another one is, being able to show someone what we appreciate as outdoorsmen and women. And, I kind of wanted to thread that through, like your work now with, as all water guides, and you're taking people out and fishing. And
Mhm.
what do you see firsthand from experiences where some of these people may be going out on a river or a lake system for the first time? Maybe it's the first time fishing, or first time to really get a guide service to wait. They can better understand what it is they're looking for, where to cast, or, what time of year, or what, time
Right.
of day, or where to go.
Mhm.
What are some of those experiences that you're seeing maybe from the first timer's perspective? And what do you feel like is, an important thing for us to be able to continue that thread of getting new people out in the outdoors? Because I feel like once you kind of get that, then that click of wanting to pursue this more and be more involved, and being more involved in the conservational aspects seems to be kind of an easy, roll through. So I just wanted to have you kind of address that, and what that's like from your perspective of seeing that, firsthand on many occasions.
Yeah. I mean, well, and I have seen it, and I love that piece of it because you're living vicariously through those people on your boat. And, to have someone, and Alvin, Dito's talked about it before. So like when someone catches their first fish, it's like he's catching his first fish again. And, I've seen people catch their first fish on lots of occasions, both at Parks and Wildlife and now guiding for all water guides. But I've also, I've seen the mother with the son. Um, you know, that's when someone shows up and it's like, hey, this is John's birthday present is to go fishing. I mean, that's sort of a big responsibility. And it's not necessarily about the success of numbers, but it's more of, of understanding that the weight of that. It's like this is a gift that you're taking this person fishing. And so it's to try to make that experience as positive as you can. And there's been times where, I'll pick up on maybe an introduction with someone over an email or a phone call and trying to fit, we'll do a little logistical call before the trip. And they can, they're saying, well, I'm going to bring my 10-year-old son or my 10-year-old daughter, and they've never fly fished before. Well, I'm going to stick a spinning rod in that boat. Because, if they've never fished, I mean, do we want to do a fly fishing lesson or do we want to get out there and put our hand, so there's that, and there's a time and place for both those things. But I think that, anything I can do to sort of take that pressure off the angler, it like transcends into a more enjoyable time. And so it's really important. And I think too, it opens the door. People will come out and they'll say, "Hey, do you mind if I mark these spots?" I'm like, "Absolutely not. Mark the spots." I'm thinking about buying a boat. What do you recommend? Well, this is what I would do based upon what you want to do. And so we'll go through that. There are no secrets, and I'll come out and come fishing and bring your kids. I mean, you don't have to have me, right? I'd love to take you fishing, but my goal is to sort of, some folks, they want a guided trip. They don't want to own a boat. They don't want to mess with all that. That's the happiest day is when you buy a boat, when you sell a boat, right?
Right.
We've all do that. And boat acronym, bust out another 1,000. We hear all that. But there's also people that do want to learn about sort of boat ownership, where to go, all these things. And I love those trips too. Sometimes we'll bring a map out. We'll talk about, this is why we're fishing here. This is why we're fishing on this point. There's a blue heron over there, and that's why we're going to go, all these different little subtle pieces that people, without being like preachy or being, in teacher mode the entire time, because I mean, I learn stuff every time I go out, and I learn stuff from the client too.
Sure.
Lots of times. So I don't mean it's a one-way deal, but it's just being open to learning. And, people ask me too, George, they'll be like, well, what happens when you get the jerk client? And to be honest with you, I have never had that happen. Folks that we take fishing, that have fished with me, I can't think of one client that I would not want to fish with again. And that's sort of I don't know if that goes back to the way that Alvin runs his business and Lene ran the business as well, but it's pretty incredible. I mean, it's just anglers and hunters, boaters tend to be just a really good group of people. So anytime we can introduce somebody and then they catch the bug like we caught the bug, more power to them. And I think that you can look at hunting numbers too. I mean, we've got like 1,100,000 plus minus hunters in Texas right now. And you can look at our numbers and you can compare our numbers with other states like per capita per 100 residents. Okay. And hunters in Texas right now, it's about 4 in 100 have a hunting license. So, 4 out of 100. And we're way down in Texas per capita. You'd think everyone in Texas hunts. We're number 35.
Wow.
New Hampshire per capita has more hunters. Kansas has more hunters. Oklahoma has more, not numbers, but per capita.
Uh-huh.
So as our population continues to grow, we're 30 million, right? And California's at 35 or 36 million. We're going to surpass California relatively soon. Well, they're at, 0.7 per 100, you can kind of see what direction, because we used to be way up there, and California used to sell more fishing licenses than anyone. So, you can look at these numbers and you can kind of see what path we're on. And I think that we do a pretty good job. These conservation organizations that I listed do a really, really good job of getting the word out and bringing folks into hunting or fishing maybe that haven't done that, especially adults, and different, TWA concentrates on youth, and other organizations do some adult mentored hunts and BHA and et cetera. But I think we also need to continue to push and educate and figure out how it all matters to non-hunters and to non-anglers. Why are oyster reefs important to a non-angler? Why is free range wild deer important to hunters? And so, you look at these issues, and I think we got to do a little bit better job of flying that flag and explain. And then in the course of that, maybe you bring somebody into the realm of hunting or fishing.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit. What do you think are some of those things that are so important in how they affect the non-hunter residents? And I do want to jump into also the idea of like how people can get involved if they are non-hunters and want to get into that or fish, because there's a lot of programs. We talked about it. TWA, Texas Parks and Wildlife, youth hunting. I know Steve Hall and I have had lots of conversations about the different things that are going on too, and providing hunter safety. And I think that there's a place for that too. But I want to just kind of piggyback on what you're saying there too, and hear your perspective on why those things are important for non-hunters. And yeah, if you can kind of lead with that, that'd be great.
Sure. And, I think that, you can start with let's just talk about the oyster example and why that matters really to everyone, non-anglers, non-fishermen, the population of Texas and beyond. Oysters, the oyster reef, as we all know, and we won't, get too much into the biology of it, but I mean, it protects shorelines, that protects, from flooding and hurricanes. It's habitat for fish, larger fish species. It's baffles for other parts and estuaries, and it all relates to clean water, the health of ecosystems, the health of water, which and some could argue safety as far as the storms and hurricanes and storm surge goes. But I always say, to quote like my friend Hal Herring, who your podcast and his podcasts are probably the podcasts I listen to related to conservation the most. But he talks about, does clean water matter to you? Does clean air matter to you? And if the answer is yes, then conservation matters. And that's it's the most basic premise to public health, because, we can talk about all these other programs, and everything, healthcare, education, these big issues that are so important to our society. Without a clean environment, none of it matters. And so, you look at these issues sort of on a national, international basis, and then you draw them back down locally, and you say, okay, what are the big conservation issues? You take an issue like, for example, let's just look at, and the listeners can do their own research on Formosa. I'm not going to say that, Formosa is good or bad, but I can say that certainly, it's the largest settlement in the history of the world filed by an individual on the Clean Water Act as far as payout was by Formosa. And, that can be researched. But the Lavaca River is a free flowing river. And right now, there's a permitting process to dam and hold up a portion of that water for Formosa, for the Formosa plant, and a lot of water, and which then goes into our bay systems. And so it's a complicated issue. There's a lot to it, but why on earth would we reward a company has the largest Clean Water Act settlement in history? I don't know. But these are issues that I think are important and should matter to everyone. Anglers are kind of leading the charge on that. CCA's leading the charge on that. Other individuals and organizations are trying to bring that up, but it should be it should be first and foremost on everyone's mind because it's important. And so it's kind of making that, crossing that into mainstream, day-to-day life of why that matters, because that affects the health of the bay, that affects the reefs, that again goes back to to public safety and public health. So it's just trying to connect those dots. And you can look at hunting as well and look at correlations there. With and again, I think that there's a lot of very heated debates going on right now regarding CWD, and I won't get into that, but I think that when we look at large ranches and properties that are becoming more segmented, it's again goes back to what we were talking about before the podcast started, is what it was like when we were hunting. Well, again, stuff changes, population grows, etc. But what used to be 5,000 acres is now 15 ranches out 1431, and then half of those have been put into subdivisions. So it's just sort of thinking more strategically on how we can sort of curb growth in certain areas that are important. And then it relates also to water conservation as well. I mean, more straws, population growth, increased temperatures, more straws is sort of the perfect storm. Maybe less rainfall, although we had a little bit today. I mean, Lake Travis is about 50 feet low. It's the sort of the new norm. And you look at all the development around Lake Travis. So it's maybe just being a little bit smarter about our water management too. And I think that also, I mean, does everyone have to have St. Augustine grass? I have St. Augustine grass in my front yard, so I'm not trying to be preachy, but I'm just thinking, should we rethink some of what we're doing and try to mainstream some of these topics?
Oh, it's a very good point. I mean, water rights are huge. I work in the water industry for my day job. I'm seeing that all the time as far as how this is affecting people and more impervious areas and more runoff and more polluted waterways and
Mhm.
the different things that, there's as a private landowner, there's things that I'm trying to do to be able to best utilize our water resources for
Sure.
our wildlife habitat. And I can do my own part in my private, land sector. But, a lot of times, and we have such a large private land ownership here in Texas, but there's a lot of things that I look at as like, our public systems, like our waterways, man, our
Mhm.
lakes, our rivers, our coastal lines. And those are things that they do. It's very important that we are all collectively thinking about that on a larger scale. Even if you're just a hunter and you don't fish, like you have to understand that everything is connected here. It's like the whole that there's a term. Remember a Lakota wisdom keeper that I used to work with. He's like Mataku Yeo Yasin. We are all related. Everything is
Mhm.
anything that we are all part of this same system. And I think in a time where we see a lot of things you mentioned, some of the potential devastations and the numbers and the new norm of having 50 feet below. I mean, it's
Mhm.
it's crazy. There's lakes and systems, river systems that are completely dry that I knew growing up. I mean, even in Carrizo Springs and, where my family kind of, comes from on, my mom's side in that area, my grandmother, when she was, younger, she's swimming in these beautiful, clear springs. There's none of those there anymore. And just imagine what happens in one person's lifetime, yet alone will happen if we don't make steps now. And I don't know if it's like the red alarm that's going off. Everyone's like, it's the important time right now. You got to do this now or you won't have
Right.
anything. But we have to protect what we have now in order for future generations to
Yeah,
enjoy them.
and that's the thing. I mean, one of my senseis is David K. Langford. The TWA office is named in his honor.
Hmm.
He's knows so much, as you know, about water rights, the importance of water, and he's been keeping records, and their ranch generationally has kept waterfall records and well records on their property, and it's certainly not what it used to be. And I think that's the other piece of this is just in general sort of where these wells are at historically, where they're at now, in some of these springs is, I mean, there's it, yeah, I mean, the Llano River for one, the Blanco River, when you go and it's just completely dry, and that's the norm, is pretty scary. And I know that things change and there's ups and downs in temperature. I'm not saying that, but I just think
Sure.
that the difference is population. The difference is how many people are utilizing well water for their, to sustain their house. And all the straws, because you can look back historically and look from 1950 on and look when big rain events came and where lake level was and how the time period it took for that lake to get down to a certain area. Now it occurs much, much faster. So that just demonstrates the additional straws, the tens of thousands of additional straws that are pulling water out of our rivers, of the wells, of our lakes. So I think that's the big difference in all of this is again, that strategic planning and how we're gonna manage water moving into the future. So yeah.
Well, and you kind of talked about that when you were, talking about just like the oyster systems right there too. And you were recently, you're part of now on the board with the TPW Oyster Advisory Committee. And, is this when some of the things you just spoke to, is that some of the things y'all are talking about within this organization right now? And
For
are there some
sure.
other things that you think are important to kind of bring to the forefront?
Yeah, I think that oysters are a big topic right now in Texas, and I'm proud to work with Parks and Wildlife in a couple of fronts. One of them is the Coastal Resources Advisory Committee, and one of them is the Oyster
Mhm.
Advisory Committee, which I'm just extremely thankful to be associated with those folks. But when you look at oysters again, and you look at, okay, well, you can, there's recreational harvest, which is very limited. You can't sell if you and I went oystering, that's, certain areas couldn't be in restricted waters. It's pretty cut and dry. And not very many people go out and recreationally harvest oysters. But really pretty much, it's leases. You've got, so you got the private leases that, they own the lease. They don't own the water or the ground, but they own the right to harvest that particular area. And if you're not the leaseholder, you can't harvest there. And then there's our public oyster reef systems, that are given numbers and throughout the different bays systems. So the third way is oyster farming, which is fairly new to Texas and has, really been around only a couple of years now, but it's growing and it's growing pretty quickly. I think there's 8 or 9 more in process, and as far as in the process of being permitted, in addition to what's already been permitted. So I think it's not to get a little bit off topic there, but I think that as far as what the committee is going to talk about is, ways to compromise for I don't mean compromise like values or compromise conservation, but to find ways that we can look at this sort of, again, a multifaceted approach to where there's going to be a portion from leases, there's going to be a portion from public reefs, there's going to be a portion from farms, oyster farming, and figuring out where all this ends up, and looking at other states that have been doing the farming for a long time, or states that have rebounded their oyster population that have gone to rock bottom, uh, and then made their way back up. And you look at some of those around Chesapeake Bay and areas like that. But yeah, I mean it's the oyster reefs, as I mentioned, affect everything in the bay system. So if we have a reef that 100 years ago was 8 feet tall and was the size of 6 football fields, and now it's the size of 2 football fields and it's 1 foot tall, well, we're heading the wrong way. So we've got to figure out the answer. And the commercial oyster industry is important industry. There's people that have been working for generations, and they work hard, and they're good people. Okay. But we've got to look at ways to ensure that they stay in business and we don't destroy our resources in the process. So it's finding that ground that works for everybody, but most importantly works for the environment, works for conservation, and for the oyster, the mighty oyster.
Nice. Well, when you were talking about that, it kind of reminded me, there was a conversation I remember tuning into a while back where you and JT Van Zant were talking about the idea of, when, and you touched it a little bit earlier, when you're like fishing, there's a lot of people who the success in numbers, right? Some people are like, oh, if I didn't, catch my limit, it wasn't really a good day fishing. And I think that that's a dangerous way to view that, because really, I've gone fly fishing one time and I've practiced before, but as far as successfully, and I caught one little trout and it was catch and release, and I can't tell you how monumental that moment was. It was one of those bucket list items, and since that day too, it's like I've wanted to go back and book another trip, and I look forward to that. I spend I've been on a couple boats that have broken down in the middle of the ocean. So my wife and my family are like, I don't know if we should be going fishing with you because I kind of have some
Right.
bad luck on the water. I think
Yeah.
I'm meant to be a landman. But as far as like, I love that. And just the peace, the serenity, just the challenge, the experience that comes from that. But what I found too with a lot of my friends that are fly fishermen was the idea of, you may take, one or two of your fish, but you're not trying to limit out. There's
Mhm.
something about keeping that balance in play and not just going ahead and taking all that you can, right? And I think that's an important thing to look at. And I kind of wanted you to talk about that idea of really the importance of that experience, maybe over the importance of the number. Obviously, it's great to
Yeah.
catch a fish and cook that for your friends and family. But I think I wanted to have you kind of talk about the idea of like when you're guiding, what is some of those the ethos of that, and trying to maybe capture more of that experience than more of the full cooler, and what
Yeah.
it is important to you in as far as that is concerned, maybe.
Sure. Yeah. And a couple things on that. I mean, Tom McGuane in one of his essays back, I think it's 71, wrote about, and I won't give you the entire synopsis, but basically drew the connection of, gathering, hunting, catching something and consuming that is inherent to sort of being a human. It's important to being a human. It keeps you connected, right? Um, and so, gardening does that. You could do that through fishing. You could do that through hunting. So I'm certainly not opposed to keeping, a fish or two, or even occasionally, depending on the fish species, keeping a limit of fish. But it's certainly not why I go fishing, and it's certainly not what got me into fishing or hunting. And so we went up to Colorado a couple of weeks ago, and we met a couple that was there, and we were overlapping. We kind of planned a couple of days of overlap, and so Keith Langford and I went fishing with another friend who was a retired game warden, Jeff Gillen Waters. We went up into the Williams Creek up above Pagosa, and I mean, in the middle of nowhere, we never saw another angler, and everyone caught a couple of small brook trout on dry flies. And we didn't catch a gazillion. I think I caught two and Keith caught two and Jeff caught one or two. But, it was just that moment and the beauty of being in the moment and the friendship. And even though, we were kind of we were jumping ahead of each other. Someone would fish 100 yards and then someone would jump up. So there were times where you didn't even see your buddy. And all of a sudden I heard around the corner, I heard like, yeehaw, woohoo. So I just put my rod down and literally ran back and saw Keith, and he's got hold on this fish, and he was like, literally, he said, his quote was, this is like the day of the year. And so in that moment with that brook trout that's like 6 inches long, and it's just the totality of the circumstances and the beauty that sort of overcomes you. And I've seen that time and time again. I was on Lake Decker yesterday morning, and kind of some clouds were rolling in, and the fish had been schooling. The black bass had been coming up a little bit, but they hadn't been staying up long. They come up and then they go down, like group of 15, 20, 25 fish. It's chasing shad. And it's so visual because you're seeing you'll see kind of the nervous water, and then you'll see a shad pop up, a couple of shad, then you'll see one fish hit, and all of a sudden it's like boiling water. And the Josh Shepard, who was fishing with me, he hadn't seen that before. He's fished a lot and he's been around a lot, but he hadn't specifically seen black bass schooling like that. And he ended up catching one, and so I was like, that's pretty cool. So the accomplishment in the moment of the day, it's like, did you did you learn something about your cast, or did you learn something about a specific fly, or did you see, the blue heron, or did you see the a giant alligator gar, or whatever it is? It's like just understanding and being open to that. I joke around and I say that fly fishing is like the yoga of fishing. Um, but I think in some ways it kind of is, because it's not, and I don't exclusively fly fish. I mean, I fly fish a lot, but I get down sometimes to Potter Island Seashore, or I'll go fishing with a buddy and I'll pick up a bass rod. I'm fine with that. But I do love to fly fish, and there is something different about it. I think everyone always says, well, the biggest difference is your fly lines, casting the fly, and in regular fishing, your lures casting your line. To me, and that's all true, I think the biggest difference is when you set the hook on a fish, you are holding the line and you are physically, you are setting that hook. With a bait cast or a spinning rod, you're just, pulling back on the rod, right? So you're in contact with that fish with your hand on the line. That to me, and you talk about the soul and the fishing and the ethos, or however you want to put it, that to me is you're connected to that fish, and it's very different. And it's like sometimes you miss them or you set your rod wrong, whatever you do, and that's part of it. Yesterday morning, I missed I don't normally fish when I'm with a client, but this was not Josh. We were friend fishing.
Right.
And so I was fishing a little bit. I missed like three fish, but it's just part of it. And the fish, the bass comes up, and you see it all, and you get all excited. I still get excited. I mean, when those fish come up on top, and I see that school 100 yards off, I get so excited I can barely talk, and I'm like, everyone, put your race off to try to get to them. So I mean, I still have that love. I still have that excitement, and I want the clients or the friends or whoever I'm with, to feel that too. And I think that they do. And this deal about you only fly fishing one time, I'm looking at my calendar right now. We actually get you up here and get you fly fishing.
We were over on the Taylor River near the Gunnison, and it was one of the most amazing experiences. My wife got one as well. We were there with my friends Matt and his wife Elaine, and everyone I think got one that day, and it was just absolutely one of the most profound times on the water that I've had. I've had some amazing experiences with wildlife throughout the country in my travels, and from hunting, or doing photography or videography, but catching that and just being there and seeing it, and it was one of those things. I was like, that it's a moment that will forever be
Mhm.
ingrained in my mind, as and because there was a lot of challenges
Mhm.
before that
Right.
finally successful moment, and it was kind of that aha, like, okay, I get it, I understand this. And this idea too, where a couple of my friends, what do you mean you couldn't keep it? I'm like, no, when you got a guide there's certain circumstances, right? If you're on your own, you can go ahead and keep one, but the goal wasn't for me to do that. I mean, I'd love to go ahead and catch the fish that, or eat the fish that I catch. I like being able to know
Sure.
where my food comes from, but
You bet.
there was something more profound about that experience, and leaving that, that experience behind. Because if we're always in a consumptive mindset,
Mhm.
whether it's fishing or whether it's, wild game on land, and we just take, by you taking, you're not leaving that experience for someone else, and you have to be mindful about that. I think it's an approach that is very important for our conservation, and the more
Okay.
people we can bring into this, and have them get that experience, is paramount. I think that's something that, having those types of experiences, really, I think, inside our own systems, is something that connects you to that, will make you want to conserve that. And I think that's it, that whole idea of bringing someone with, and, having
Yeah.
taking these experiences. We've talked about it, a minute ago too. There's youth hunting programs. There's adult hunting programs. If there's, if you want to
Mhm.
get into this in fishing, if you want to get into, there are state sponsored organizations, that are all throughout here, and other states too, for people who are listening elsewhere, look in to see, because there are organizations that are out there that can help, guide you,
You
and
bet.
get you into the
You bet.
outdoors.
And
And
and, and there's other outlets too. I mean, you think you look at example, look at the Loco Trash Bash or some
Hmm.
of some of the cleanups that are going on, like the Colorado River cleanup well, Lene Dideau, ran forever, and
Yeah.
now Alvin's taken over. That, there'll be a couple of hundred people that come to that. And I have seen where, a family will come out, like the family unit, the kids and the mom and the dad are there and they're picking up trash along the river, and it helps build that connection. And all of a sudden you sidebar with them and they're like, well, have you ever fished? And then it segues into something else. And before you know it, they've got a couple of kayaks and they're on the lower Colorado River themselves, or they go to the Llano or San Saba or whatever. And when there's water and they fish. And so it's like, there's a lot of different ways to get those roads that we were talking about and those paths to get into these hunting, fishing, camping, boating, birding, hiking, whatever. There's doors. We just have to, figure out sometimes where those doors are to open up. And the groups that we're talking about that you mentioned are doors.
Well, and you mentioned too, like the idea of like that trash cleanup. Because I remember there was I think maybe it was might have been a fly fishing group that you had done a speech with, and you were talking about just the idea of how much cleanup. I believe in one of those, there was like 22 tons of
Yes.
trash that was picked up. And
Mhm.
that, if you can imagine that, folks, like how much trash is in our waterway systems, and obviously how that affects so much of our amazing species that are through there, and how much it is important that we pick up the trash. I mean, I mentioned them before just because I'm friends with Jim Kirkarudo and like Outdoor Stewards Conservation Foundation. They'll send you out these bags, and he has a big initiative. It's like pick
Oh
up your
yeah.
trophy trash, and so
Yes.
they'll send you these bags out, and you take them with you, whether you're hunting, whether you're fishing, hiking, whatever it is. I think it's important for us to go ahead and clean up these environments and be the steward examples, because when people see you do that, they're going to get inspired to do it. They're going to be like, oh, what are you doing? Well, I'm picking up trash. Well, it's not my trash, but it's someone else's trash. And if like, I think that collectively maybe that mindset is something that can hopefully expand to other people around you. And we need to do things to clean up our waterways. I see so much pollution, and it's super important. And even just on our own private land, I've talked to you about, like, having a place in South Texas, the amount of trash that comes through because people are coming through, and that's a whole nother
Mhm.
topic. I won't get into that, but the idea of like when people come through, they're leaving their backpacks behind, they're leaving the trash behind, water bottles, and there's so much stuff that it's like, it's an unending project to try
Mhm.
to keep that clean. And that's just our private land. There's so much land that's public land and waterway systems that are
Sure.
embedded with trash of all types. And I'm not
And
talking about.
and you mentioned private land a couple of times. It's like the dove hunting lease program that Parks and Wildlife does that partners with private landowners. And
Mhm.
again, nothing in Texas is accomplished without private landowners regarding conservation. It's a partnership that's been going on since the inception of Parks and Wildlife. Way before that
Mhm.
is the way that people feel about their land and their willingness and want to protecting that property. And so hugely, hugely important piece of it. But it's like sometimes these, it's like people go out, they do the dove hunt on a public dove area, and you look around, you see all the shotgun spent casings. There's some initiatives right now that are happening with some conservation organizations where they're going out and picking these up, picking it up. They're having a cleanup day so that other landowners might be more open to, leasing their property. I mean, who wants their property trashed, right? And again, hunters generally do not do that, but as we all know, some do. And so it's just the little things. It's like if you do hit the Llano, if you do hit the Devil's River, take a trash bag with you, collect. If you see a bottle, even if it's not yours, pick it up. Someone may see you do it, someone may not see you do it, but it's still the right thing to do.
Mhm.
So, it's like, what can we do? What's in our control? Well, whether the Formosa gets the permit may or may not be in our control, but picking up this trash and helping to keep the Colorado River clean, helping to keep the dove hunting areas, that we can control. And I think too, it goes back to these grassroots efforts sometimes. Sometimes they evolve into a bigger issue. And then someone sees it or hears about it and it just keeps going. I think we can't underestimate just the power of the individual sometimes, is my point.
No, very good point. Before we sign off, and I want to have a second podcast with you where we can kind of cover some other things we talked about because there's so much rich conversation that we can have. And last couple of questions I had, one of which was, when you ended up as I think it was in 2017, you were named the director of law enforcement
Mhm.
in Texas. And so then at that point in time, you got, you're pinned with your colonel badge. You are then overseeing, I think it was like 550 something Texas Parks and Wildlife law enforcement divisions. And I was kind of curious about what those years were like for you when you were ahead of it. What was like that day to day? And and I also kind of want to maybe talk about a little bit with you worked with a lot of different agencies, right? And I think there was an interview where you talked about the idea of law enforcement being a team sport. And I
Mhm.
think, those are a couple things I'd like for you to connect on how you see fit. But I was wondering about that. What that was like for you to then be bestowed upon that honor and what those, what that meant for you, what it was like for you on a day to day and kind of after, a long career of being a game warden, what it was like to be the colonel and be the head of things as far as Texas game wardens is concerned.
Sure. And great. Yeah, I love talking about that and the team sport aspect of it. I think, and I'll answer your question, but I think that conservation is a team sport too, right?
Mm,
And
good point.
so, there are all these organizations and they all have, there's room. It's like there's room for everyone is my point. And so again, back to whatever path you choose, we want you in the conservation realm, whatever it is. But back to your question, first of all, it was, I mentioned early on how becoming a game warden was a dream come true for me. And, when that badge was when my wife pinned the badge on my chest at the ceremony, um, I mean, it was, I can't even use the word dream. I have to say surreal
Yeah.
because it was. I mean, it was surreal. My daughters were there and friends were there. And, yeah, it was a big deal. It's a big deal for me. And just the opportunity to work with the men and the women directly in the law enforcement division, the hardest working people that I have ever met in my life. Um, and then the other divisions within Parks and Wildlife, you know, the other agencies and organizations, obviously. But I got to that position not because of myself. I got to that position because of other people and who I surrounded myself with and who helped me during my career. And I don't want to read the list, but because it's so long, and I don't want to accidentally leave somebody off. But I can tell you that I just learned early on, regardless if we're what the issue is, and this was how I was socialized into law enforcement, and obviously my parents and how I was raised, and I'm so far from perfect, it's not even funny. Deeply flawed. I make mistakes every day, but it's you got to be positive. You got to wake up in the morning and you're gonna have bad days. We all have bad days. I
Sure.
have bad days. So it's not, I don't mean like every single second you got to be jumping up and down, jump roping and smiling, right? But overwhelmingly, you need to be positive. On an average day, you need to be positive. And it's okay to think critically. And I was, sort of raised to think critically. Why are we doing this to get to there? What's going on? Ask the questions. Don't be afraid of the questions. Don't be, if you ask a question, I'm going to answer it. But it's not okay to be a cynic. And I have a friend who says he's a cynic, but he's not a cynic, and he knows who he is. I hope he's listening because he says he's a cynic, but he's not because he loves people so much and he's always laughing and smiling. But he always says, "Oh, I'm a cynic." Well, no, you're not. So it's not okay to be a cynic. It's okay to be a critic and to think about things and to, have this dialogue and critical thinking is important. And when I say critic, I don't mean like nitpick somebody. I'm talking about critical thought.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, and that was something as colonel that again, there were far better colonels than I, and there will be better colonels than I. but I always tried to just be as open as I could, and think through processes. We looked at a lot of processes, and we worked through a lot of conflict. And I say we, not I, because it was senior staff and executive director, Carter Smith, and other senior staff and folks over at conservation organizations. Again, I lean on CCA a lot, and then other organizations at the time that we were working with law enforcement agencies and people, a lot of times don't understand, especially in these rural areas, the game warden's office is at the sheriff's office. Okay, it's a little cubicle or a little office or a little desk there. Um, Sometimes in the larger counties, you don't have that as much as you do in the rural counties, but I would venture to say probably 80% of game wardens' offices are at local sheriff's departments. And so right then you're learning real quick how important that relationship is. Um, I talked about using my own credit card and filling my tank of gas. When Sheriff Hennigan from Tyler County, who's passed now, heard about me doing that, he said, "Hey," he called me on the radio, 3319. He said, he was one. He's the sheriff. He's the high sheriff. He said, 1 to 3319. Yes, sir. Why is the sheriff calling me? I've obviously done something wrong. So he says, "Meet me over so-and-so." So I meet him. Well, it happened to be the location for the county gas, the big bulk fuel station. He gave me a key to the gas tank. And he's like, "I don't want you putting your own money in that gas tank anymore." And so, I'm sure that it was 1993. I mean, I'm sure now violates all kinds of whatever. I don't get into that.
The statute's closed. Yeah.
But the point is that it's about relationships, and that's a very basic example, but it keeps going, and whether you're talking about relationship with Parks and Wildlife as a whole with the Cattle Raisers Association, or as a whole with TWA, or as a whole with another state law enforcement agency, or a federal U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or a river authority. It's these relationships that that keep it moving. And a lot of times, what was interesting, George, is that I met and got to know folks in different divisions when I first went to work, and like we would carry biologists out and do help them get them somewhere. We do a duck count together. We do something. That was kind of like you weren't really supposed to talk to the biologists. It's like we're law enforcement. And so that opened a lot of doors. I mean, Clayton Wolf was the biologist in Jasper when I was in Tyler County, and then he ultimately became the division director of the wildlife division. We were working together side by side up in Austin. And so throughout our careers, here we are again. And I think we see that in relationships and in life all the time. And so again, that's helped me, more than anything, in addition to just working with incredible people and working for absolutely incredible people. It was being the director of law enforcement at Parks and Wildlife was, it's hard to fight the emotion, as you could probably pick up on earlier, but it was a big deal to me and still is.
Well, I thank you for all your service and all your continued, expansion of these ideas and philosophies and thoughts and actions and conservation and in throughout our state. I highly encourage everyone to take a look at it. In the show notes, I will have links to, kind of just a story of your history and who you've, worked with and been a part of, and some of the organizations and agencies that you still work with. And I think it's important, especially for those here in Texas that are listening, to go and look at these and, become a part of these organizations as you can, or learn about them and see what they're doing, because there's really some great ones out there that are doing some amazing things that are really helping in unseen ways, sometimes in many seen ways. But I highly encourage you guys to go check that out. And I thank you for all that you've done for our state and for these organizations. Along those lines too, I was kind of curious, what it is that you think about your own, professional and personal legacy. Is this something that you kind of think about as far as the impacts that you've had and that you continue to have and that you want to have? Are those things, in the forefront of your thought and how you kind of address your day to day, whether it's, your work that you've done already with Texas Parks and Wildlife, as far as, being, a game warden for all these years, and then also with all water guides and guiding people and, through your own guiding services. And, I'll have you, leave some links and things here in a minute on that as far as where people can follow you and get involved and, book a trip with you. But I was curious really about your idea of legacy. Is that something that, you think about? And if so, how is it that you approach that?
Well, let me first say that you are, you were thanking me for all this. And I want to thank you because, you are a storyteller. Um, Podcasts on paper, video, whatever the media is, you are a storyteller. And you've hands on done conservation efforts and work, but without a storyteller, without someone who is bringing these issues and bringing us to the forefront and you're an educator. People are going to be like, well, I watched this podcast and I feel dumber now than I did because I was on it. But you're an educator. And I want to seriously tell you, how much I mentioned my Colorado trip, and we listened to several of your podcasts on the way up there, and the whole family was listening to them. And then they would, start conservation and light a spark about something or talk about another issue or whatever it is. So just thank you for what you do. Seriously.
Thank you.
As far as my legacy, I got to be honest, it's not about me. I don't really think about my legacy. I just, I think about the future. And I think that the legacy is going to be our kids, your kids, the kids of listeners. It's like, again, the doom and gloom stuff when we talk about population growth and the lake being low and all these negatives. And then we think about our kids and we think about, oh my gosh, they're so much smarter and they're like more engaged than we were, and they're doing these things and they're bringing this to the forefront and they're talking to their friends about these issues. So I'm just super proud. I have hope. My friend River Horse Nagadate, I really want to put you guys together. If you haven't already talked to River Horse, but he'll check me every once in a while, and he'll bring me back in. He'll lasso and he'll like pull me back in, and he'll be like, Graham, you're kind of going down a little bit of a negative road on the doom and gloom conservation stuff. And so he's like, you gotta remind people to be hopeful and that there is hope, because if there's not, then what are we doing this for? Why are we doing this if there's no hope? And so I think that again, it's not about me. There's no legacy other than having hope in this next generation and knowing that we're not done yet. I don't mean like we're hanging it up,
Right,
You're
right, right,
young,
right.
you're younger than me, but still. But we're not hanging up. We're not done yet. But just being hopeful of the future and the future in conservation, and knowing that there's a whole nother generation that's coming and that cares and that's going to be so engaged. It's going to make us look like, we didn't know what we were doing.
Well, I mean, well said, man. I think that approaches this idea too of like our roles then as we get, older, as you have these experience to be able to mentor people. And I think that is a very, very important thing, that if you have, there was a lady I met many, many years ago, who talked about this idea of being a conduit, not a catcher's mitt. If you
Mhm.
have wonderful things that you're learning, you don't just catch it and hold on to it yourself. You have to be a conduit. You have to be able to explode that out to other people and share that. And I think personally, that's kind of where I feel like I'm in like
Mhm.
my hunting world now. It's like I would rather see a new hunter, whether it's a child, whether it's an adult, be
Yeah.
able to experience that, whatever that is, that first day in the field, that first time of seeing that deer, the first time of harvesting something and cooking your own meals for your friends and family, whatever that is, it's so much more important to me than having my own personal experience and,
Mhm.
filling a freezer. Well, I love to do that. Don't get me wrong. I love to eat wild game. We have, mutual friends like Jesse who have
Sure.
amazing, cookbooks so you can follow along the way. And it's a great journey, but being able to help bring up that next generation and to keep that hope alive in that
Mhm.
string of, amazing experiences going is very important. So I echo that. For anyone who would love to book a trip with you and be able to experience, whether it's through your own, Grahame Jones, out adventures, and I'll have links down below for that, or through all water guides, what is the best way for them to follow you, and also your socials too, for people to kind of see what you're involved in and what it is that you're helping to put out there in the world? Where are some places people can follow you in this journey?
Yeah, so if you do want to get out there and do a little fly fishing or fish however you want to, you can book a trip through All Water Guides and social media, Instagram, big presence on Instagram. Alvin does a fantastic job with that, and I'm Grahame L. Jones on Instagram too, so you can get on there and follow me and as well, and um, um, about 90% fishing related, but there might be some obscure post that gets on there from time to time. But I enjoy social media. Everyone's kind of anti-social media, but I enjoy it. I think it's a good way to connect with people too, and it's a good way to stay informed. I think too on issues relating to conservation. So I think if we use it for the right purposes, and also, I mean, it's a great way for us to stay connected as well. I mean, it's I go to your page to go to your latest podcast is the easiest way for me to do it. But yeah, I mean, book a trip, All Water Guides, but I'd love for you to get on there and look me up as well, and we can share things on social media for sure.
That's great. And then what is your own personal website?
It's grahamejones.com. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have all the links below for everyone to check out. And all the organizations that we talked about today. We want to highlight all those. Definitely, everyone, please, look at the show notes, check out these links, go to them, see how you can get involved and how we can continue, this goal of great conservation and hope alive for future generations in Texas and the whole country. Grahame, thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to having you back on again, and I look forward to getting on the water with you, man. Let's go do some fly fishing together, huh?
Hey, George, I appreciate it. Good talking to you. Really enjoyed it. And I can't believe an hour already went by. But like I said, I'm at your service. Let's go fishing. And just again, thanks for everything you do.
Thank you as well, sir. We'll be in touch soon. You have a good afternoon.
See you. Take care.
Take care.